है उसके मर्म को अपनी भाषा के शब्दों में पाठकों के समक्ष रख सकें और वही प्रभाव पैदा कर सकें जो लेखक ने अपनी कृति में किया है। आज का यह सत्र इसी महत्वपूर्ण बिंदु पर, उसके तमाम पहलुओं पर और उस परिदृश्य पर बात करने के लिए आयोजित किया गया है जिसे हम अनुवाद कहते हैं। इस सत्र की अध्यक्षता आदरणीय आलोक भल्ला जी कर रहे हैं। आलोक भल्ला जी हम सभी का जाना पहचाना नाम है। आलोचक की दुनिया में आलोचना के क्षेत्र के अलावा वे बेहतरीन अनुवादक हैं। आप फाउंडेशन ऑफ शार्क राइटर्स एंड लिटरेचर अवार्ड्स के प्राप्त करता हैं। आपकी महती उपस्थिति इस कार्यक्रम को, इस परिचर्चा को एक उन्नत दिशा देगी। मैं बड़े सम्मान के साथ में आलोक जी को मंच पर आमंत्रित करता हूँ। साथ ही इस सत्र में चंदना दत्ता जी, शाफे किदवई जी, सोमा बंदोपाध्याय जी और सुमन्यु सतपति जी अपने विचारों के माध्यम से इस सत्र को गति देंगे, परिचर्चा को नया आयाम देंगे। मैं आप सभी अतिथियों को मंच पर आमंत्रित करता हूँ। आप सभी अतिथियों के अभिनंदन। इस सत्र में पधारने के लिए, स्वागत करने के लिए मैं अकादमी के अध्यक्ष माधव जी से आग्रह करता हूं कि कृपया पधारें और अंग वस्त्रम हमारे अतिथियों को पहनाएं और उनका अकादमी की ओर से अभिनंदन करें। सर्वप्रथम अध्यक्षता कर रहे आदरणीय आलोक भल्ला जी। मंच के दाईं ओर सुमन्यु सतपति जी बैठे हैं। आपका स्वागत है। आप दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय के अंग्रेजी विभाग के पूर्व प्रोफेसर रहे हैं। साथ में सोमा बंदोपाध्याय जी मौजूद हैं। आप लेखिका, अनुवादक और बहुभाषाविद हैं। आपकी 35 पुस्तकें तथा 15 अनुदित कृतियों का प्रकाशन हो चुका है। आपके 200 से अधिक शोध पत्र राष्ट्रीय और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय पत्रिकाओं में प्रकाशित हुए हैं। हमारे साथ चंदना दत्ता जी हैं। आप लेखक, संपादक और अनुवादक हैं। आपने प्रकाशन संस्थान द इंडिया लॉ की स्थापना की है, जिसके आप मुख्य संपादक हैं। आप भारतीय सांस्कृतिक संबंध परिषद नई दिल्ली द्वारा प्रकाशित त्रैमासिक पत्रिका इंडियन होराइजन की संपादक भी रही हैं। हमारे साथ शाफे किदवई जी हैं, प्रख्यात द्विभाषी समालोचक, दक्षिण एशियाई अध्ययन के विद्वान, अनुवादक और स्तंभकार हैं। आप सभी की इस गरिमामय उपस्थिति से यह सदन गौरवान्वित हुआ है। मैं आदरणीय अध्यक्षता कर रहे भल्ला जी से आग्रह करूंगा कि वे संचालन सूत्र थामें। हमारे पास लगभग 90 मिनट का समय है, पर्याप्त समय है। आप चाहें तो बैठकर भी बात कर सकते हैं, जैसा आप उचित समझें। धन्यवाद।
Thank you very much. Should like to thank the Sahitya Academy for inviting me here to this prestigious festival. My association with the Sahitya Academy goes way back, and it's always a pleasure to work with them. As far as today's seminar is concerned, we have 4 distinguished speakers, and I don't want to stand very much in their way, but I want to make a few odd propositions. I'm not a theoretician, though I've written on theory. I keep changing in my mind since yesterday as to what exactly I want to say, and I want to say many things. But the first thing I really want to say is that I think this title, Problems of Translation, needs to be perhaps deleted from our intellectual discourses. I think the reason for my saying that is that almost invariably when we start talking about problems of translation, we start in our critical discourses becoming very narcissistic. We talk about our language, which has a distinguished resonance and connotation and idiomatic usage, which the other languages possibly cannot catch. But we are equally narcissistic when we insist that we can very easily translate everything from the Bible to Anach, Matova into our languages, because for the same reason that our languages have resonances and connotations and idiomatic usages. So the result, of course, of this kind of criticism not only is a narcissistic one, but I tend to want to call it this, the Hindi word comes to mind, swad literature, zaika literature. Hamara zaika acha hota hai, unke zaike mein kuch nahi hai. The result of this narcissism is always antagonism. Now, that's my verse. I could elaborate upon this. I don't have the time. But my proposition that I want to make to you is that, and I thought this is how I would begin first, is that India has always been a translation culture. And we never discuss this. We never talk about it. We never talk about the fact that from the Brihatta downward, all our literatures, all, and I underline all our literatures, are translations. But I want to modify that statement because I think that too smacks of a certain kind of narcissism and a nationalism. I'm opposed to both, partly because I don't like looking at myself in the mirror, and partly I think because Tagore was right that all forms of nationalisms can be pathological. I also want to say this because all cultures are translation cultures. All. I underline that word again. One cannot think about, let's take any example, one cannot think about Shakespeare without Plutarch, or without Socrates, or without Cicero, or about Montaigne, or about... It is impossible to talk about Shakespeare without talking about Cicero. So that there is continuously in Shakespeare an act of translation. The same holds true for Marlowe, for instance, and Chamberlain couldn't have been written without the Latin biographies of Tamor, and so on and so forth. The same holds true for William Blake. Blake is not possible. It is impossible to talk about Blake without talking about the fact that he read Dante in English translation, which had just come out, and he had also read Plato in the translations which had just come out by Taylor, and above all, this might please all our cockles in our heart, he had also read the Gita in English. And that without this continuous act of translation, there would have been no William Blake, nor would there have been a Henry Walden Thoreau, who read the Gita umpteen times and had read Manu, he said in his notebooks about 30 times, in order to understand what it is that he was after in his own worldview. So, not only is India a translation culture, I think all cultures are translation cultures. The third proposition I want to make, and it's very quick, I have only 5 minutes, is that translation, and this occurs to me only recently, translation is actually a mortal exercise. It has mortal consequences. I want to just very quickly give 2 or 3 examples. That when the Bible says, in the beginning was the Word, I want to change that slightly, not in the mischievous manner in which Samuel Beckett changed it to say, in the beginning was the pun, which is a nice translation of various things, but I want to say in the beginning was translation. And this thought came to me only the other day when I was at the Bhimteka caves, which are, by the way, those who haven't seen it should go, because they're really miracles. They're the very first record of translation in the world. You see 2 kinds of translation there which astonished me. One, here are primitive men looking at the world and translating it into visual object. On the wall of the cave is a hand which is drawn. Isn't it wonderful? That somebody in about 100 century BC is actually noticing the hand as the crucial element, not just the hand of God, but the hand of man, which is drawing. Whether it's the same hand which is drawing itself, I don't know. But surrealists might have had a chance of talking about it. Sorry? I can't, I'm very hard of hearing, so. I am very hard of hearing, so if you have any comments to make, please make them. I won't understand them. The second thing I noticed was that the first act of translation was not only noticing the world around you, noticing flower pots, planting trees, flowers, but the first act of noticing in translation were dancers and drummers holding hands. And the drawings of human beings were very minimalist. So my proposition that there are mortal consequences of translation are this, that the transition or the translation from silence into culture is the enormous act. The Bible says, of course, in the beginning was the Word. I want to say, in the beginning was translation. The silence of God is translated into word, and words are translated into an infinitesimal amount of words and languages. The roots are the same. So first, notice the English translation of the Bible. In the beginning was the Word. In the past, there was, but in the continuation also, in the process of living, there is continuous translation because this is a process of creation is endless, and each creative object has to be renamed. And each created object has to be named in each language, and each person has to understand that. And so translation is not an impossible activity. It's just an act of recognizing that other people can also recognize the same words as you can. My third part of the proposition is this, and this I came across only recently. I didn't know this. I was reading Stephen Greenblatt on the translations of the Bible in ages prior to Queen Elizabeth, and the translators, as you know, perhaps, were executed. Tyndall and Camden were both executed, and executed very brutally by Queen Tudor. And it's Elizabeth also, who of course continued to execute people who did not agree with her version of the translated biblical text. I'll give you one example and then stop. Queen Elizabeth insisted as she was moving from Catholicism into Protestantism, and this is a crucial part of Hamlet. You can't understand Hamlet unless you understand this transformation of one word. The prayer for the dead reads as follows. I'll have to find, my handwriting is also bad. The Catholic Bible says, I commend thy soul, God, to God, the Father Almighty, and thy body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The crucial change in the translation is one word. And I'll read that to you and then basically stop. We, the priest doesn't say I, it says we, therefore commit his body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, and dust to dust. The dead can no longer be in contact with the living. Henceforth, the dead will not come back and talk to the living. This is a crucial shift in translation, which Shakespeare exploits very ambiguously by having the ghost come back, leaving us all wondering whether it's the ghost or not the ghost. So the dead are no longer in touch ever again with the living. This is crucial act of translation. So this small change in the translation ensures that the dead are completely dead and that the living are living. I will end with this basically and just leave a small other thing I learned recently. I was asked to read some poems under the rubric Poetry and Spiritualism. I thought I was invited to read poems, but suddenly I saw that this leaflet said Poetry and Spiritualism, and I am the least spiritual person I know. So I thought, okay, I will do the first thing that I should do is check the dictionary. And the spiritualism, under spiritualism, the meaning of the word is those who talk to the dead. And I thought, I don't want to be a spiritual poet. I want to be just a poet who talks about people who walk on the earth, and in the translation of that, who are secular. Secular meaning not what we mean, but simply off this earth, on this earth, and as long as we are on this earth, we can talk to each other in any language that we feel like talking to, and if we can't translate, we can always turn to the next person and say, Atamjit ji, will you please translate it for me? Thank you very much. We're running out of time. I'm told we should be a little more conscious of time. So may I just first invite, changing orders because people have flights to catch, Ms. Soma Bandapadhyay to give us. Thank you.
Honorable President of Sahitya Academy, Shri Madhav Kaushik ji, Chairperson of this session, respected Professor Alok Bhalla ji, respected panelists, Chandana Datta ji, Professor Shafiq Idwe ji, Professor Shumanya Shatpathy ji, Dr. Ram Kumar Mukhopadhyay ji, and all other eminent writers present in this auditorium. Very good afternoon, namaskar, vadakkam, namaskaram, adab. At the outset, I wish to express my sincere gratitude to Sahitya Academy for blessing me with wonderful opportunities to realize the unity and diversity among the diverse culture and languages of our beloved nation through translation for the last 2 decades. In a multilingual country with cultural diversity like India, translation plays the role of a bridge to connect people of different languages, communities, and in its way helps to create a feeling of oneness. Because Indian literature, in spite of being written in different languages, conveys the same message, that is, quote unquote, Bibidhero Majhe Dekho Milono Mohan. I would like to thank Honorable Chairperson for kindly allowing me to speak first, as I have to catch a flight at 4. Thank you, sir. Since I would be talking about Indian languages, so I would like to deliver my lecture in Hindi. वरना मेरे अनुवादों का सही आस्वाद आप भी नहीं ले पाएंगे. हमारा भारत बहुभाषी है, बहुसांस्कृतिक है और बहुजाति है, और इसीलिए वो महामिलन का देश है. और ये बात सबसे पहले विश्व कवि रविंद्रनाथ जी ने कही थी, नाना भाषा नाना मौत नाना परिधान बीबीधेरो माझे देखो मिलोनो महान. भिन्न भाषाएं, भिन्न मत, भिन्न परिधान, विविधता के बीच देखो मिलन महान. और इस विविधता के एकता का संदेश देने वाले कविंद्र रविंद्र के इस भारतवर्ष में आंतर प्रादेशिक साहित्य के आदान प्रदान का इतिहास बहुत ही कुतूहल जगाने वाला है. कोई भी प्रादेशिक साहित्य केवल एक विशेष प्रदेश और विशेष काल का ही साहित्य नहीं रह जाता, बल्कि स्थान, काल और पात्रों के विभेद को भूलकर हम उस साहित्य के साथ एकात्म हो जाते हैं. और भारतीय साहित्य को समग्रता में जानने के लिए आवश्यक है कि केवल अपने प्रदेश की भाषा और साहित्य का अध्ययन न करें, बल्कि दूसरे प्रदेशों की भाषा और साहित्य का भी अध्ययन किया जाए. बिल्कुल जिस तरह से हमारे चेयरपर्सन सर ने अभी थोड़ी देर पहले बताया था, मैं उसी को जो है उसकी पुनरावृत्ति करते हुए कहूँगी कि उपनिषद, संस्कृत काव्य, बौद्ध पाली साहित्य, सूफी साहित्य, बांग्ला का बाउल संगीत, वैष्णव पदावली और पाश्चात्य रोमांटिक काव्य साहित्य को से परिचित न हुए, बिल्कुल जिस तरह से हम रविंद्र काव्य को समझ नहीं सकते, जान नहीं सकते, बिल्कुल उसी प्रकार अन्य भारतीय साहित्य की विशेषताओं से भी परिचित न होने पर आधुनिक भारतीय साहित्य के गतिपथ को समझ पाना भी बिल्कुल असंभव होगा. और ये कार्य संभव होता है एकमात्र अनुवाद के माध्यम से, क्योंकि भारत की ये बहुभाषिकता न केवल राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर मिलती है, वरन विभिन्न प्रदेश भी हमारे बहुभाषी है. 1971 की जनगणना के अनुसार भारत में 1652 मातृभाषाएं हैं. इनमें से 33 भाषाएं प्रमुख हैं, जिनमें से 8वीं अनुसूची में 22 भाषाएं उल्लिखित है और ये विभिन्न भाषा परिवारों से इंडो आर्यन, द्रविडियन, ऑस्ट्रोएशियन, टिबेटो बर्मन आदि के अंतर्गत आती है। और इन विभिन्न भाषा परिवारों को भाषाओं को बोलने वालों के में परस्पर एक समरसता बहुत पहले से रही है। एक भाषाभाषी समुदाय ने दूसरे भाषाभाषी समुदाय के सामाजिक सांस्कृतिक विकास में साथ दिया है और आवश्यकता के अनुसार उसकी भाषा को सीखता रहा, अपनाता रहा और प्रवीणता प्राप्त कर उस भाषा के साहित्य के विकास में सक्रिय सहयोग देता आ रहा है। इस प्रकार शताब्दियों के सामाजिक सांस्कृतिक समन्वय की प्रक्रिया में भारत की सामाजिक सांस्कृतिक एकता और अखंडता और भी अधिक सुदृढ़ हो पाई है। और इस प्रकार भारत की इस बहुभाषिकता में अनुवाद ही उस सेतु बंधन का कार्य करती आ रही है। तो ये जो अनुवाद है ये असल में अंतर्प्रांतीय भाषाओं के बीच के संबंध को अधिक मजबूत बनाता है, देश के दो प्रांतों के पाठक वर्ग के बीच एक भावनात्मक एकता के सूत्र को स्थापित करने में भी सक्षम होता है। बिल्कुल जैसे पिछले 3 दिनों से भोपाल में इस सभागार में अलग अलग कमरों में जो आयोजन किया गया है, उसी तरह केवल यही नहीं, राष्ट्रीय अखंडता के लिए भी दो भाषाओं के पारस्परिक संबंधों पर विचार किया जाना चाहिए। और यही भूमिका अनुवाद आज से नहीं सदियों से निभा रही है। फिर से जो है मैं आदरणीय चेयरपर्सन जी को ही उल्लेख करना चाहूँगी। उन्होंने भी बताया कि किस तरह से आदिकाल से आदिम युग से जो है अनुवाद जो है मनुष्य के बीच पारस्परिक संबंधों को और जो है सुदृढ़ बनाता आया है। 8वीं शताब्दी हमारे भारतवर्ष में लीजिए, आदि शंकराचार्य ने केरल के कोच्चि नगर से 40 किलोमीटर दूर कालड़ी कस्बे में जन्म लिया। वो मलयालम भाषी थे। उन्होंने वैदिक धर्म का प्रचार करते हुए भारत के पूर्व में जगन्नाथपुरी, पश्चिम में द्वारका और उत्तर के बद्रीनाथ और दक्षिण के श्रृंगेरी में 4 मठ की स्थापना की। 13वीं-14वीं शताब्दी में तमिल भाषी रामानुचार्य ने वाराणसी में आकर भक्ति आंदोलन चलाया। तेलुगु भाषी बल्लवाचार्य, कन्नड़ भाषी मध्वाचार्य, मलयालम भाषी निम्बार्गाचार्य ने वृंदावन में रहकर कृष्ण और राधा संप्रदाय की अलग जगाई। साथ ही चैतन्य महाप्रभु चैतन्य देव हमारे बंगाल के नदिया से जो है मथुरा में जाकर उन्होंने वैष्णव भक्ति का जयगान किया। और नवजागरण कालीन साहित्य के प्रसार में भी जो है भारतीय भाषाओं में अनुवाद की एक बहुत बड़ी भूमिका रही है। अतः भारत की ये नियति ही रही है कि बहुभाषी होने के नाते इसने अनुवाद के माध्यम से इस परंपरा को बनाए रखा। और इस कारण भारतीय भाषा में लगातार होते रहे अनुवादों के कारण इस भाषाओं की व्याकरणिक संरचना और सांस्कृतिक संरचना में भी काफ़ी समानता मिलती है। लेकिन इसके बावजूद भारतीय भाषा में परस्पर अनुवाद बहुत सहज नहीं है। जिन चुनौतियों का हम अनुवादकों को सामना करना पड़ता है उसमें सबसे पहले जो चुनौती है वो है लिपियों की समस्या। कई लिपियों में भारतीय भाषाएं जो है वो लिखी जाती है और इसी कारण से कई शब्दों को जो है कई बार हम लिपियों को पढ़ नहीं पाते। हमें तब किसी और माध्यम से जो है उस अनुवाद का सहारा लेना पड़ता है। और प्राय ये देखा जाता है कि भारतीय भाषाओं से अनुवाद के समय हम अंग्रेजी माध्यम से जो अनुदित कृतियाँ हमारे सामने आती है उससे, तो तब तक जो है वो आस्वाद बहुत दूर तक जो है भटक जाता है, अलग हो जाता है। दूसरी है समुच्चार्य। जैसे कि मैंने कहा, आप जानते हैं कि 9वीं सेंचुरी 9वीं शताब्दी में जो है सबसे पहले तमिल का जन्म हुआ। 11 से 13वीं की शताब्दी के बीच भारतीय आधुनिक भाषाओं का जन्म हुआ और 14वीं शताब्दी में उर्दू सबसे जो है छोटी जो है उम्र की भाषा मानी जा सकती है। और जो आधुनिक भारतीय भाषा है उनका स्रोत अगर हम माने तो संस्कृत से होते हुए पाली, प्राकृत और फिर अपभ्रंश की विभिन्न शाखाओं से। और इसी कारण जो है विभिन्न भारतीय भाषाओं में कई समुच्चारित शब्द आ जाते हैं जिनका अर्थ बिल्कुल अलग होता है लेकिन उच्चारण एक जैसा होता है। और इससे कैसे जो है अर्थ का अनर्थ हो सकता है मैं आपको बताती हूँ। एक शब्द है सत्कार। कल ही जो है कई मैंने सेशन जब अटेंड किए मैं सुन रही थी, इनका सत्कार करना चाहिए, सत्कार करना चाहिए। ये जो सत्कार है वो मराठी से शुरू करके कई अन्य भाषाओं में सत्कार का अर्थ होता है मान सम्मान देना, जबकि बांग्ला भाषा में सत्कार का अर्थ है अंतिम क्रियाकर्म कर देना। तो एक बार मैं जो है बहुत ही सुविख्यात भाषाविद इंद्रनाथ चौधरी जी के साथ मैं महाराष्ट्र में जो है मुंबई में एक भारतीय साहित्य समारोह में गई थी और वहाँ जो है एक बड़े ही बुजुर्ग व्यक्ति 104 वर्ष उनकी उम्र थी, उनको बुलाकर जो है वो मराठी के जो महाराष्ट्र के जो है एक स्वतंत्रता सेनानी थी उन्हें मंच पर बुलाकर उन्होंने कहा, घोषक ने कहा, आइए इनका हम सत्कार कर देते हैं। उसी वक्त नीचे बैठकर इंद्रजीत जी सर ने कहा, अगर ये बंगाल में कहा गया होता तो तबाही मच गई होती। इसी तरह है दूसरा शब्द उद्भट। उद्भट मीन्स हिंदी में प्रकांड विद्वान, वेरी नॉलेजेबल पर्सन, और बांग्ला में है उद्भट का मतलब बड़ा अजीबो गरीब, अजीब आदमी। अब सोचिए कि बंगाल के उसमें जो है बुलाया जा रहा है, मैं अभी अभी जो है हमारे बीच आदरणीय हमारे प्रेसिडेंट साहब उद्भट को बुलाती हूँ मैं, तो वो सोचेंगे कि बड़ा अजीब है ये। तो इस तरह से शब्दों को अगर ना समझे, केवल समुच्चारित होने के कारण उनका हम प्रयोग करें तो बहुत ही अर्थकानत बन सकता है। भाषा वैज्ञानिक दृष्टि से अनुवाद की समस्या के दो पहलू हैं, द्विभाषीय रूपांतरण और भाव रूपांतरण, और ये दोनों एक दूसरे के परिपूरक होते हैं। और अनुवादक की विषय वस्तु पर ध्यान रखते हुए अनुवादक को शब्द योजना, वाक्य रचना और समन्वय की व्यवस्था करनी होती है। और यहाँ पर जो है ये रूपांतरण अधिक से अधिक, खासकर साहित्य के अनुवाद में इसका जो है भावांतरण ही होना आवश्यक है। रचनात्मक साहित्य से अभिप्राय उन सारे ललित साहित्य से होता है जिसमें महाकाव्य, खंडकाव्य, मुक्तक, उपन्यास, कहानी, नाटक, जितनी भी विधाएं हैं वो सारी चीज़ें आ जाती है। अच्छा, अब अनुवाद की समस्या जो है वो स्रोत भाषा यानी कि सोर्स लैंग्वेज से टारगेट लैंग्वेज, लक्ष्य भाषा के पारस्परिक संबंधों पर बहुत कुछ निर्भर करता है। साथ ही साथ भाषा प्रदेश विशेष की संस्कृति का अभिन्न अंग होती है, और इसी कारण वहाँ के पोशाक, आभूषण, रहन सहन, परिवेश, धर्म, विश्वास, रीति रिवाज, चिंतन पद्धति, वो सारी चीज़ उसमें है। भूखंड की जो सारी विशेषताएं हैं, भौगोलिक, प्राकृतिक, सामाजिक, आर्थिक, धार्मिक, उन्हें भी जो है वो उस साहित्य में प्रतिबिंबित होती है और साथ ही वहाँ की भाषा को प्रभावित करती है। अब मैं सीधे आ जाऊंगी कि कई बार जो है हम देखते हैं कि एक ही भाषा परिवार की जब भाषाएं होती है तो अनुवाद करना बहुत सहज होता है। मसलन बांग्ला के साथ अगर हम तुलना करें तो बांग्ला, मैथिली, असमिया, उड़िया, इन 4 भाषाओं से जब हम करते हैं तो हमारे लिए आसान होता है। अब जो है गैन साहित्य, आप जानते हैं कि जिसमें ज्ञान, विज्ञान, चिकित्सा, प्रबंधन यानी कि मैनेजमेंट, कार्यालयीन भाषा, ये सारी चीज़ें आती है, उसका जो है शब्दानुवाद संभव है। लेकिन जब हम साहित्य से करते हैं तो वहाँ भाव और कल्पना की बहुत महत्वपूर्ण स्थान होती है, भूमिका होती है। और क्यों? क्योंकि भाव और कल्पना सूक्ष्म और तरल होते हैं, फ्लोटिंग, उसे हम चेंज कर सकते हैं। कोई भी जो भी अनुवादक है वो अपनी तरह से उसका अनुवाद, भावांतरण कर सकता है। अब प्रश्न है कि तथ्य और विचारों का तो संप्रेषण हो सकता है, पर कवि के हृदय में तरंगित यानी कि लहरें लेते हुए भाव और कल्पना का संप्रेषण कैसे करें? कविता के अनुवाद में अनुभूति का स्थानांतरण नहीं किया जा सकता, वरन समानांतर अनुभूति का उद्बोधन हो सकता है। इसीलिए अनुवादक जो है उसका काम दोधारी तलवार पर चलना होता है। ज़रा सी चूक हुई कि बस समझो कि अनुवाद पूरा का पूरा व्यर्थ हो जाता है। सबसे पहले मैं एक बहुत ही सुंदर उदाहरण देना चाहूँगी। हिंदी के सुविख्यात दिवंगत कवि केदारनाथ सिंह जी की कविता है एक लोक कृति की अनुकृति, और उसमें क्या लिखते हैं? जैसे सुनी थी मैंने मंगल माझी के मुँह से। अर्थात ये एक ओरल लिटरेचर का हिस्सा है। उन्होंने उस अपनी सारे विशेषताओं को लेकर यानी कि लोकगीत की विशेषताओं को लेकर कवि ने उसमें अपनी निजी अनुभूति और कल्पना का मिश्रण करके बहुत ही खूबसूरत जो है 4 पंक्तियां मैं रखती हूँ। आम की सोर पर मत करना वार, नहीं तो महुआ रात भर रोएगा जंगल में। कच्चा बांस कभी काटना मत, नहीं तो सारी बांसुरियाँ हो जाएंगी बेसुरी। किसी से प्यार करना तो चाहे चले जाना 7 समुंदर पार, पर भूलना मत कि तुम्हारी देह ने एक देह का नमक खाया था। इस कविता में लोकगीति है, प्रेम, आवेग, गीतिमयता यानी कि गेयता, उसका सारा सौंदर्य जो है उसमें समाहित है। और इतना सब कुछ का अनुवाद क्या सहज है? नहीं, यदि आप कवि को उसके भीतर उतरकर उसकी अनुभूति को न जान पाए। ज़रा सी मैंने कोशिश की है बांग्ला में। देखिए, आमिर मुकुले मारिस ने ढील, ताहले महुआ सारा रात कांदबे जंगले। काঁচা বাঁশ কাটিস নে রে, তাহলে বেসুরো হয়ে যাবে তোর সবকটা বাঁশি। কাউকে ভালোবেসে যদি চলে যেতে চাস তো যাবি 7 সমুদ্র পার, তবে ভুলিস নে তোর দেহ আরেকটি দেহের নুন খেয়েছে। मूलतः कहा जाता है कि स्रोत और लक्ष्य भाषा का ज्ञान होने से ही अनुवादक हो जाते हैं, लेकिन इतना आसान नहीं है। महज शब्दानुवाद करने से ही काव्य अनुवादक अपना धर्म नहीं निभाता। तो क्या करना होगा? मूल कविता में प्रयुक्त हर शब्द की गहराई तक अनुवादक को पैठना होगा, तभी वो स्रोत भाषा की कविता में भाव रूपी अर्थ को ग्रहण करके लक्ष्य भाषा के शब्दों को अभिव्यक्ति दे सकेगा। और ऐसा ना हुआ तो लेखकीय शैली यानी कि स्टाइल या अभिव्यक्ति बिल्कुल बदल सकती है और अर्थ की विकृति हो सकती है। कभी कभी वो कर्णप्रिय भी नहीं होता। जीवनानंद हमारे बंगाल के एक बहुत बड़े कवि रहे हैं। उनकी देखिए बहुत ही विख्यात कविता है বনলতা সেন। उनकी चंद पंक्तियां हैं। চুলতার কবিকার অন্ধকার বিদিশার নিশা, মুক্তার সাবস্তির কারুকার্য, অতিদূর সমুদ্রের পার হাল ভেঙে জানাবিক হারায়েছে দিশা, সবুজ ঘাসের দেশ যখন সে চোখে দেখে দারুচিনির দ্বীপের ভিতর, তেমনি দেখেছি তারে অন্ধকারে, বলেছে সে এতদিন কোথায় ছিলে, পাখির নীরের মতো চোখ তুলে নাটোরের বনলতা সেন। यानी कि पाखिर नीर मतलब यहाँ आश्रय की बात कर रही है। कवि दीन दुनिया पूरा घूम कर आकर वो आश्रय लेना चाहता है अपनी प्रेमिका के। पंछियों के नीर के समान उसकी आंखें। ये जो यहाँ पर प्रतीक है, क्योंकि हम लोग देखते हैं कि कवि जो है वो आँखों को कमल के साथ कभी कभी तुलना करते हैं और भी कई प्राकृतिक संपदाओं के साथ, लेकिन जीवनानंद की ये जो प्रतीक या फिर ये जो बिंब है बिल्कुल अलग था। उन्होंने कहा पंछियों की नीड़ की तरह। इसका माफ़ कीजिएगा, मैंने एक अनुवाद देखा था हिंदी में, उसमें लिखा गया था पंछी के घोंसले, चिड़िया के घोंसले की तरह आंखें उठाती है बनलता सेन। यानी कि पूरा का पूरा जो उसमें जो अर्थ बनता है, उसकी जो सौंदर्य है, वो पूरा का पूरा जो है वहाँ पर उसकी हत्या हो जाती है। इसका हम क्या कर सकते हैं? अंतिम लाइन देखिए। केश उसके जाने कब की काली विदिशा की रात, चेहरा उसका श्रावस्ती का कारुशिल्प, दूर सागर में टूटी पतवार लिए भटक रहा नाविक जैसे देखता है दारू चीनी का देश, हरे घास का देश, वैसे ही देखा उसे मैंने अंधकार में। पूछा उसने कहाँ थे इतने दिन, पंछियों की नीड़ से आंखें उठाकर नाटोर की बनलता सेन। अब देखिए दूसरी बात, रविंद्रनाथ। रविंद्रनाथ के जो है ये विख्यात रविंद्र संगीत है। आमी चीनी गो चीनी तुम्हारी ओगो विदेशिनी, तुम्हें थाको सिंधु पारे ओगो विदेशिनी। यहाँ लय, संगीत के जो लय है दैट इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। और सबसे बड़ी बात है रविंद्रनाथ ठाकुर की जो शैली है, अनुवाद करते समय उसका पूरा का पूरा ध्यान रखना होगा, वरना अनुवाद उसकी कल्पना, अभिव्यक्ति और भावों को संप्रेषित करने में व्यर्थ होगा। एक उदाहरण देखिए, ये अनुवाद मैंने पढ़ा है। क्यों रविंद्रनाथ को हम अन्य भाषाओं में पढ़कर रविंद्रनाथ को न पहचानने का कारण एक ये भी है। आप अनुवाद देखिए। मैं पहचानता हूँ तुम्हें ओ विदेशिनी, तुम रहती हो समुंदर किनारे ओ विदेशिनी। ये जो लय है, साथ ही जो शब्दों का जो नाद सौंदर्य है, कर्णप्रियता है, पूरा का पूरा नष्ट हो रहा है। तो कैसे होगा? मैं जानूँ तुम्हें पहचानूँ, ये गीत है। मैं जानूँ तुम्हें पहचानूँ अरे विदेशिनी, तुम रहते हो सिंधु पार अरे विदेशिनी। जहाँ ओगो विदेशिनी बोल रहे, ये जो छोटे छोटे नुआंसेस है, ओगो का अनुवाद नहीं होता, लेकिन तब आपको उसका समार्थक बिल्कुल उसी तरह के जो गेय सौंदर्य देने वाले शब्द को ढूंढना होगा। सर जैसे बिल्कुल कह रहे थे अपने में। तो हमने उसमें क्या चुना अरि विदेशिनी, यानी कि संबोधन, जो बहुत ज़रूरी है। तो एक अनुवादक के रूप में हमारा उद्देश्य जहाँ तक हो सकता है कवि की कल्पना को सही शब्दों का चयन करके साकार करना होगा और पाठकों तक पहुँचाना होगा। कई बार मैंने जो है साहित्य अकादमी के ही जो है रिव्यू और इसकी अनुवाद होने के नाते कई बार मेरे पास रिव्यू के लिए कुछ चीज़ें आती है। तो मैं कई बार देखती हूँ कि मुश्किल है, बस 5 मिनट, मुश्किल होने के कारण वो उस पैराग्राफ को ही मिस कर देते हैं। अनुवादक जो है उसको छोड़ देते हैं, पंक्तियों को जो है बीच में से गायब कर देते हैं, लेकिन ये बहुत गलत होगा। खासकर अगर साहित्य अकादमी ने एक कार्यशाला का आयोजन किया था, हमारे आदरणीय राम कुमार मुखोपाध्याय जी बैठे हैं, उस समय वहाँ के रीजनल डायरेक्टर थे। मीर की और गालिब की गज़लों का इन्होंने अनुवाद करवाया था। उस समय मैंने देखा कि एक हमारे शंख घोष जो है वो हमारे एडिटर थे उस समय। बहुत महत्वपूर्ण रचनाएँ थी मीर की गज़लों का, लेकिन मैंने देखा कि गज़लों का बिल्कुल बांग्ला में जब अनुवाद कर रहे थे तो ऐसा लग रहा था वो स्वरचित कविता हो जा रही है। गज़ल की जो अपनी खूबसूरती है उसको अनुवाद करना बेहतरीन, मतलब बहुत बहुत ही मुश्किल काम था। उर्दू फारसी अरबी के शब्द दूसरे अन्य भारतीय भाषा या फिर विदेशी भाषाओं के जब शब्द आते हैं तब भी इस तरह की जो है मुश्किलों का सामना हमें करना पड़ता है। मेरे जो मैंने अनुवाद किया था गोपीचंद नारंग जी की किताब साख्तियत पसाख्तियत मशरिकी शरीयत, उस समय मुझे इस तरह की मुश्किलों का सामना करना पड़ा था। उसमें सादी खान नाम के एक शायर के जो है एक गज़ल का उन्होंने उल्लेख किया था। सादी खान चित्र बनाते थे और चित्रों में जो है गज़ल या शायरी को लिखते थे। एक्चुअली जिस तरह से रविंद्रनाथ करते थे, ही यूज्ड टू ड्रॉ पोएम्स, लिखते नहीं थे। वो तीखे खद्दो ख्याल निखारे दिल में, वो गेसुए खमदार सवारे दिल में, नज़रों में है किस किस के किताबी चेहरे, किस किस के है नीम रुख हमारे दिल में। अब बताइए, अनुवाद तो संभव है लेकिन तीखे खद्दो ख्याल, गेसुए खमदार, किताबी चेहरे, नीम रुख, इनके प्रयोग संबंधी नियमों को ना जानने से उनका अनुवाद हम कैसे करेंगे, और वो इफ़ेक्ट, वो जो उसका प्रभाव है उसे दूसरी भाषा में लाना, यही अनुवाद के अनुवादक के लिए सबसे बड़ी चुनौती है। इसी तरह माधव कौशिक जी की एक कविता मुझे याद आती है, लफ्ज़ों में सच्चे प्यार का इजहार भी तो हो, परतों के नीचे राख के अंगार भी तो हो। बांग्ला में करेंगे तो भालोबाशा रोंगी का भाषाएं होक प्रियो, छाइएर परोतेर नीचे आगुनो तो थाके प्रियो। वो प्रिय मुझे लाना पड़ा, लेकिन वहाँ पर अंगार भी तो हो, वो उसका बिल्कुल उसी हिसाब से मैं अनुवाद नहीं कर पाई। तो ये सारी उसके जो है लिमिटेशंस है। इसी तरह मिथकों का, माइथोलॉजिकल जो स्टोरीज़ है, हमारी प्राचीन भाषाएं, अपभ्रंश, ब्रजी, मैथिली, डिंगल, पिंगल, अवधि, ये सारे इनमें जो काव्य है, अलंकार विधान है, जो शिल्प का बहुत महत्वपूर्ण अंग है, उनका अनुवाद बिल्कुल बहुत ही मुश्किल है। उसी तरह छंद संबंधी समस्याएँ हैं। रविंद्रनाथ की भारत तीर्थ का एक छोटा सा उदाहरण देकर मैं अपनी बात समाप्त करूंगी। मिलिबे मिलाबे दिबे आर निबे जाबे ना को फिरे, এই ভারতের মহামানবের সাগর তীরে। ये मिलिबे मिलाबे दिबे आर निबे, इसका बिल्कुल हूबहू हिंदी में अनुवाद करना संभव नहीं है, लेकिन हम इस तरह से कोशिश कर सकते हैं। मिलोगे मिलाओगे दोगे और लोगे, लौट ना जाए कुछ भी इस भारत के महामानव के सागर किनारे। तो इसी तरह से आप देखिए सुकांत भट्टाचार्य की, प्रयोजन नहीं है कविता को अब कोमलता की, कविता तुम्हें देता हूँ आज छुट्टी, शुदा के राज्य में पृथ्वी गद्यमयी, पूर्णिमा का चांद जैसे झुलसी हुई रोटी। ये जो काव्य में बिंब विधान है, प्रतीक और चित्रात्मकता की समस्या, ये बड़ी समस्या है। इमेजरी और सिंबल जिसे हम कहते हैं, उसका अनुवाद संभव नहीं, लेकिन इसके बावजूद भी हम कोशिश करते हैं। और कथा साहित्य का आप जानते हैं, बहुत सारी बातें असल में 10 मिनट में सारी बातें नहीं कही जा सकती, लेकिन हाँ, ओरल लिटरेचर है, इसका अनुवाद जो है राम कुमार जी के संपादन में मैंने किया था, जिसमें 28 जो है लोक भाषाओं से इसका अनुवाद किया था। तब भी मुझे इस तरह की चुनौतियों का सामना करना पड़ा। लेकिन बिल्कुल मैं ये कहूँगी कि यहीं पर रुक रही हूँ। बिल्कुल जिस तरह से ये जो समस्याएं हैं वो अगर तूफान है, तो इस तरह से हम तुलना कर सकते हैं कि जो नाव है नदी में, वो नाव तो अनुवाद है, नाव का जो खिवैया है वो साहित्य अकादमी है, और वो भाषा के, एक भाषा के इस पार से दूसरी भाषा तक हमें किसी न किसी रूप में ले जाएगा, और ये काम चलता ही रहेगा, और ये बिल्कुल अनुवाद ही ये काम कर सकता है। इसलिए जय हो अनुवादकों की, जय हो साहित्य अकादमी की और अनुवाद साहित्य की। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Sorry about that. Thank you so much to Sahitya Academy, to chair and a distinguished panel and a very, very distinguished audience as well. I'll very quickly pose some questions because I think it is very important for us who are actually translating that it is the practice of translation which matters much more to me than the theory. Not that I can, separate it completely, but it's the nitty-gritty of, what is it that we are doing when we are translating. Professor Bandyopadhyay has actually given several examples of, how a translation might fall short, or what are the problems that translators face when they are looking at translations. So I will not go into any examples of that kind, But yes, we cannot escape translations. If you see how we've been in the various panels right here, there are so many of us who are speaking different languages all the time. And even if we share languages, we have to continuously think words, ideas to express ourselves to each other. So it's not just that we are translating between, let's say, language A to language B. We are even translating in the same language. We are continuously trying to translate ourselves. And I think it is in that we are alive all the time. If we are reading books, we are responding when we talk of literary translations, we read books. All of us read differently, right? The same book, we don't understand or imbibe that book in the same way, and that is because of where we stand in terms of who we are, how we've been brought up, what our experiences have been. And in that, therefore, no two people will ever translate in the same way. And why just two different people? Even we, if I go back to a translation that I have done, let's say 6 months back, when I reread it after that gap, I begin to see where either I've gone wrong or I could have done it better, because that language within me has changed over even 2, 3, 4 days. We do that. That is why translation is such a fluid and active process within ourselves in the way we use language. I'm talking to you today in a certain way, tomorrow it will change. So we are doing it. We can't escape this. And so we have to accept that this is how we are placed as people with different languages, different sensibilities. And so I'll raise a few questions which trouble me, not just trouble me in a bad way, but which engage me, questions which I am bothered about. I share with other translators, friends who are very passionate about working with languages, working with translations, bringing translations to readers. And I've been in publishing, so I know how difficult sometimes it is to place a book in the market and make that book work. So yes, we are translating, but how does the work go further? So I'll, and in several smaller groups, I feel, conversations around translations are far more useful to people who are working with literary translations. At least it is to me, because it is in that conversation that I ask a question or somebody poses a question and we try and figure out continuously what is it that we are doing in the work that we are doing. So rather than, just sit and theorize, I think it is the practice, the conversation that brings about some fluidity and some polish, perhaps, if that word I can use, into the work we are doing. When we do these conversations with friends, and I'm, you would understand because we've had several discussions in the last month or so, we found that many of us, we are very passionate about the work we do and we are very good friends, but we really are divided in how we are looking at some words or some practices. So I'd like to raise some questions. I think there are questions and there are more questions. We don't really always have the answers, and I think that's a very good thing because it is pushing us to look at our work in a committed way more and more. So who do we translate? Who should we translate? Of course, many translators will say that we translate books or writers that we feel very closely about. I think in one of the sessions yesterday, somebody said, I don't translate because it's a sponsored translation. I think Vivaji, you made that point, right? So yes, many of us don't take up translation projects because we have been asked to do it. We do it because we've read and we've enjoyed that work. So there is that question, who do we translate? In the morning we were talking about how does a book get picked up or an author gets picked up for translations. There are some authors who are being picked up continuously perhaps, many of, and there is also a difference. I mean, Professor Bhalla has taught us that, to be dedicated to one, writer or a movement in translation, that itself is extremely important too. Because then we, as people who are engaging with a writer, go more deep into understanding that writer, his or her philosophy, the language, and other things. Otherwise, what we do, we pick up one here, another story there, and that does, kind of spread out our own commitment, perhaps, to translation. So, who do we pick up for translations? Do writers and ideas about writers, are we through word of mouth and through a book present in the public, in the market, does that attract other readers or other translators to pick up that writer? Or maybe there are many that we don't know about, several writers, several books that we need to take out and work with. The other question is there, and since the topic is about the challenges for translators in the bhashas, do we translate differently when we are looking at fiction and then non-fiction? And one of the, a very well-known translator did say a year back that, I can close my eyes and translate nonfiction. It's so simple. But I don't feel that it is true. Of course, there's a philosophy that we are transferring, but I think sometimes translating nonfiction can be equally or more difficult than perhaps even translating fiction. Because in fiction, you do play with, feelings and, like one of the questions posed yesterday was that translations fail. Because can you translate my anger? Can you translate my pain? And of course, maybe, it's a challenging thing, but we try to do that. We find words for metaphors, we find words for different idioms, but we do work at it. But I'll come to that again and see what kind of, we are English, we are translators. I am a translator into English. And no matter what we say, that is the language that I feel most comfortable translating into. So yes, it may be unfortunate, but I think it's a very important link language. And we will continue to work in it so that we are able to bring out as much as we can into the common readership, so to say. So some of the questions is, this is something that a lot of us who are doing translations into English keep talking about. How Indian should our English translations be? How much is too much and how much is too little? So what are the echoes from our bhasha languages? How much of that should be retained in our English translations? And it's not an easy question to answer. It's not like, there's a grid and we can say, okay, so much, 30%, not more than that. It is not possible to do that. But yes, it's a question that we must remember because, like I said, we were divided. There are translators who kept saying that no, if it's a translation into English, then it should be a translation completely into English. There should not be any bhasha words in that translation. Why else are you translating? But we also, speak of Indian English fiction, right? I mean, we are talking translations. But there are writers who are writing in Indian English, and we accept them very well. In fact, we are very proud of our writers. But that's a different kind of a language which is at play. So if we can accept Indian English fiction or writing with a certain kind of language, I think we could think of making our translations, the English of the translation, also redolent with that kind of English and build, a lexicon which each one of us, when we are working with different works, we will have to be able to figure out what words are working, what words are not working, where does an idiom translate. So we'll have to build that lexicon. We have to come together as a community of translators to ask ourselves, how did you make that work? But I think if we accept Indian English fiction with its very Indian English, then maybe we can accept English translations as very Indian English translations. So I just like to read out a little bit from the foreword to Kantapura. It's not required because people are familiar with the foreword, but I do feel that even in 1938, Raja Rao was saying something that we can still look at and apply to at least our own consciousness, and then see what is the kind of language that we are trying to use in the translations that we are doing from our bhashas into English. So he's trying to say how stories should be told, and he says, one such story from the contemporary annals of my village I have tried to tell. There itself is, inverting the structure of the sentence. But he's managed to convey what he's trying to do, and it's an English that we all love. The telling has not been easy. One has to convey in a language that is not one's own, in a spirit that is one's own. One has to convey the various shades and omissions of a certain thought movement that looks maltreated in an alien language. He's still calling it an alien language at that point of time. I use the word alien, yet English is not really an alien language to us. English is the language of our intellectual makeup, like Sanskrit or Persian was before, but not of our emotional makeup. So somewhere we have moved a lot, and perhaps English has become the language of our emotional makeup too. We are all instinctively bilingual, many of us writing in our own language and in English. We cannot write like the English. We should not. We cannot write only as Indians. We have grown to look at the large world as part of us. Our method of expression, therefore, has to be, he uses the word dialect. We argue about it, whether we should call it dialect or not. That's a different thing, but he writes, our method of expression, therefore, has to be a dialect which will someday prove to be as distinctive and colorful as the Irish or the American. Time alone will justify it. And then he goes on to create Kantapura, which is done very well in this kind of language, right? So maybe we could think of that and take it into our translated English works. I notice also then when I, as a reader, am reading, let's say, a Korean translation into English, or Japanese or a Chinese translation, I don't really keep thinking, and I think this happens to a lot of us, don't keep thinking about, is it Korean enough? Or is it Japanese enough? We are looking at that text as an English language text, and we like it for being an English language text. But somehow, when we are looking at our own translations from the various bhashas, we become extremely critical about, do we have enough echoes from the bhashas here? Is it redolent with our bhashas? And I haven't been able to answer why we do it. I don't know if we can, but that's something that engages me, this thought of, why is it that we are able to read text from outside? After all, we've all grown up on Homer, and we've never asked ourselves, is this a translation? When we were students, at least, we weren't even aware of the fact that this is a translation and who the translator is. I'm not saying that we should have our translations read very smoothly, because many of us also ask ourselves, why can we not accept a slightly awkward English, because that's the kind of English we are speaking, right, in our daily languages. Why can't we bring that flavor into our translations? So again, a question for myself, and I hope some of us here will be able to talk about it. Why is it that we are making a difference between these literatures and our own literatures in translation? When I read the translated literatures, it's time? Okay. So I'll end here because there are a whole lot of questions, and I'm sure, when Professor Bhalla opens the floor, we'll be able to talk about it. I'll just end here because...
Mr. Shafiq Idwai. I'm sorry, we're running out of time a little bit, so yeah.
Thank you very much. First, I express my deep sense of gratitude to Sahitya Academy for organizing this session, Challenges Before Translation in Indian Languages. I see, apart from panelists, eminent panelists, Professor Bhalla is here, who translated many Urdu writers, Intisar Hussain, Chaktai, and partition stories into English very well. And another Chandana, she was speaking, she translated another eminent Urdu writer, Jogendra Palji, into English, and Soma just left. She translated Narang Sahib books into English, and I saw so many eminent scholars among audience. Professor Aziz Parihar is here, Professor Azurda Sahab is here, Sukrita Pal is here, Professor Nand Kishore ji here, and Sheen Kaf Nizam Sahab, who translated so many stories from Rajasthani into Urdu. So that's why there are so many people around. So as you know, I belong to Urdu, I write in Urdu. So I would be trying to restrict myself to Urdu translations, how it was rendered from Urdu into English and from English into Urdu. Before that, so many points have been raised, very pertinent points have been raised by Professor Bhalla and Professor and Chandana and Soma. I'm not going to touch upon it because they're all very pertinent points. But the point Chandana made he just casually referred that the point he made vehemently rather. He said that basically translation, as we normally believe, it is basically practice. Translation means being and doing, not theorizing. But the point is, it is basically theoretical. I personally feel it is basically theoretical proposition. You have to know so many things about culture, what culture aspirations are there. Because what translation is not just find word for word, isn't it? It is something more than that. You are dealing with, you are translating culture. You are not translating language. Language is only the medium. So that's why so many problems are there. So another point we talk about, we think that the translation is as good as original or even better than original. It is a just misnomer. It is just common sense that made us blind. Because if you are reading, fluency is not the only thing we try to achieve it. One Urdu critic, Muhammad Hasan Askari, in Urdu fluency we say it is Rawani. He said, we always talk about Rawani. Rawani, he just made a very, I would say, sickening remark, but it has a point. He said, Rawani to Nali mein bhi hoti hai. Isn't it? It's not the only thing. Fluency is not the only thing we just talk about. If you are reading Shakespeare, it means you are not reading Miranese. There must be some difference, cultural differences must be there, and you must be aware of that. So that's why the translators, they try to just find equivalence. What translator in Urdu, you see, what translators are, normally translations are basically indirect, it's not direct translation, they are indirect translation, or it is curated translation, or you can say it is a meditated translation. So that's why secondary source we just try to read through. So that's why so many problems are there. So basically what I feel is every word is somewhat a cultural concept. So you are dealing with not only the language is a one aspect, but it's something like that. Say, take the example, very simple word, that is a dupatta. Urdu mein hum log kehte hain dupatta. Can you find any equivalent in English? If you say headgear, scarf, stole, there are many, but it has got some romantic connotation as well. Sukrita is here, she will bail me out. So that's why this is the real problem. So here, these are some very important things. And this year for Urdu, it is very rewarding because 2 awards, JCB award, backed by Urdu writer Khalid Javed, whose book Nemat Khana is translated into English by Mayor Afshan Farooqi, and even Mohsin Khan's book Allamia Ka Karkhana. It was rendered into Hindi and Bharati Bhasha. That was a BOB, Bank of Baroda prize was given to Urdu. So that's why the point I was just making is in Urdu, how to translate so many things. I think in translation, the biggest problem is when you are, again, I just picked up what Chandana said, that you are referring to colloquial language, some slang, dialogue, or speech kind of quality. Some speech are there and dialogues. I'm afraid not, even in so many accomplished translators are there. So when it comes to translating some colloquial expressions, or some kind of speech connotations, or sociolect or ethnolect, it's not only standard language, then they normally fumble. Or even that's why you see you are translating cultural aspect, even the ecology, even the name of the one translator, Farag Saab's Nazm is Farag Saab's very famous long couplet rendered to long Nazm, Adhi Raat, translated in English. And Farag says, Har Singhar ke darakht. Then one very accomplished Urdu translator rendered it into, because he was not aware of that, Har Singhar is the name of a particular tree. He translated it as every Singhar tree. Isn't it? So this is, I'm not going to point out the name or howlers, but this is what we talk about. So that's why it is something related with so every word is culturally charged. Even the name, and it's not only the food habits or the something related to dishes, we talk about the zaiqa, isn't it? So it is some real problems are there. So as far as the Urdu is concerned, I think the basic in our sense, translation, and even Asma Chaktai's translation, the one thing is that they use they use irony time and again. So irony means you are saying something and the intended meaning is somewhat different. So that's why normally they falter at. If you just see the translation, so how scar, how irony and some other devices, how they are rendered into English, this is the biggest problem. And normally the people falter at. So these are some, I think, the basic issues in Urdu. And in Urdu, these are some very important questions. I was just referring to Suresh Rituparna ji was here. The other day we were discussing Urdu, what kind of language is there? To translate humor or to translate, humor or irony is very difficult. So very famous Urdu humor writer, Mushtaq Ahmed Yusfi. You may be aware of, you may not be aware of. He referred to this is the language play. How it is rendered in English, this is the question. So that's why I'm just recalling what he wrote in Aab Gum. He referred the first time, एक बार ऐसा हुआ कि लाहौर में मुशायरा हुआ. उसमें 10,000 लोगों का मजमा था और पहली बार किसी मिज़ाह-निगार ह्यूमर राइटर, उनको मुश्ताक अहमद यूसुफ़ी को ज़हमत दी गई और दरख्वास्त उनसे की गई कि आप इस महफ़िल की सदारत करें. तो वो बैठे. आज़ुदा साहब तो उन्होंने आज़ुदा साहब यहाँ बैठे, उन्होंने बहुत अच्छे ट्रांसलेशन किए से कश्मीरी से उर्दू में, उर्दू से कश्मीरी में. तो वो लिखा कि मैं सदारत कर रहा था, तो एक शायर ने जैसे ही शेर पढ़ा तो 10,000 का मजमा था. लालू खेत में, लाहौर में एक जगह लालू खेत, वहाँ मुशायरा था. तो 10,000 लोग जो थे वो दाद देने लगे. सब लोग वाह 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 करने लगे. यू मस्ट बी अवेयर ऑफ दैट. तो यूसुफ़ी साहब ने कहा, मैं माइक पे आया और मैंने कहा कि जो चीज़ 10,000 लोगों की समझ में आ जाए, खुदा की कसम वो शेर नहीं हो सकता. तो लोगों ने ताली बजाई. दिस इज द वन पार्ट. द अनदर पार्ट इज दिस इज द वन पार्ट. उनका जो चीज़ 10 लोगों की समझ में आ जाए वो शेर नहीं हो सकता. का पहला मौका था कि साइमाइन कराम और शोराए उज़्ज़ाम दोनों ने मुझे हूट किया. तो मैं फिर माइक पे आया और मैंने कहा, जो चीज़ 10,000 लोगों की समझ में आ जाए बैक वक्त, वो खुदा की कसम शेर हो सकता और कुछ नहीं हो सकता. This is the way. Then you can render it into English. It's a word play. It's extremely difficult. You see, so what the point I was just making is, this is the, I think, the crux of the matter. This kind of how you translate तंज जिसको उर्दू में कहते हैं, तंज व मज़ाह, है ना, irony and speech quality, how it is rendered into English. And the one thing is that there are so many words we are in speaking, we are multilingual. We are using so many words. If you are translating it from English into Urdu, in English there are so many words. We say faction. Faction is not just synonym of fact and fiction. You put together, then Urdu, what you will say? You have to go for neologism. New word you have to coin. But I'm afraid not many Urdu translators, they do it. It is, you see, fact and fiction you put together, then the word is faction. It's not group, it is another word. How to render it into Urdu? Because no word exists like that, then you have to coin, translator may coin new word. So Urdu we say waqia or afsana. If you put together, then the word is like that, waqia and afsana. You can't make it. English, fact and fiction, we make it like that. So in Urdu, I would suggest, maybe you may say the word does not exist in English, so that's why in Urdu. So why you are here? Your job is to create new kind of vocabulary, new kind of idiom. So I would suggest waqia and afsana. If you combine it together, then it would be waqsana. Or English, there are so many words, like we say infotainment, information plus entertainment. You put together, one word is there. In English, it is not there. In Urdu, it is no equivalent is there. If you're translating it, I saw so many translations from English into Urdu. They usually this kind of new kind of vocabulary that is used. New words are there. So you have to find new words. Infotainment, how you render into Urdu. One is malumat or tafri. Entertainment means tafri, and information means ittalat ya malumat, what you can say. Then you have to use two words together. Then we can say, I'm not sure about it, whether it will gain currency or not. Then it would be malumat or tafri. You put together, then the word may be malufari. Then Urdu writer said, no, it is no word exists. So I said the word already exists, so what is the need of translator? Isn't it? So the point is, I noticed in Urdu, we don't coin new words, because we take sanad, कि हमारे शोरा ने उसका इस्तेमाल किया नहीं. ज़िया फारूकी साहब जब बैठे हैं, हमारे मशहूर शायर और उर्दू फारसी के आलिम, वो कहेंगे ये तो साहब वर्ड, ये तो डिक्शनरी वर्ड है ही नहीं. अगर डिक्शनरी में वर्ड है तो हमारी ज़रूरत नहीं है फिर, है ना. जब ज़रूरत होगी, then you have to coin some new words. So what the point I was just making is, in challenges before say Indian languages, I think every language, as you know, it is deeply mired in cultural practice. So it is basically culture, but you are translating, say in Indian context, then India stands for certain values. And I think all Indian languages share that language, share their values, tolerance, so many values are there. We share compassion, isn't it? So these are some shared values are there. If you are translating something, these are basically human values. So challenges before Indian languages is that we share a worldview. Worldview is somewhat different, be it Bengali, be it Malayalam, be it Urdu, be it Hindi. All languages, they share some basic human concern. So Indianness, or you can say India, stands for certain values, they are there. So they adhere to. So basically, translation, I would again say, it is not that you are so many, if you go to books, then you will find so many translation studies, and basically it is a linguistic exercise. We say free translations and semantic translation, adaptation, or word-to-word translations, or communicative translation. So I would suggest, I personally feel that communicative translation is the best thing to do. Literal translation, they won't work. So adaptative translation and communicative translation, basically in Urdu, what we say translation is basically indirect translations. They are meditated translation or second-hand translations. First-hand translations, Urdu lack, but still there is a galore of translation in Urdu. So many very good translators are around. So that's why this year, even times Sahitya Academy gives translation award everywhere, but two very prestigious awards were given to Urdu authors. both in English and Hindi. So that's why these are some points I just want to make it, because Professor Bhalla is here, is a very well-known translator and a scholar. He made a certain point, he talked about narcissism. We think that our language is supreme, and the next one, and the second language lacks these qualities. So every language is equally important. Every script is equally important. It's not just, while Urdu is the sweetest language, no, every language is sweet. But we think that Urdu सबसे शीरी ज़बान है. It is just a misconception, isn't it? Every language is equally valid. So this is again, I just express my deep sense of gratitude to Sahitya Academy for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is particularly special to me because, like me, he is very fond of nonsense verse. And I'm hoping that he will share some, yes, and perhaps translate them. Not nonsensically, but sensibly. Sumanyu.
Esteemed Chair, Professor Bhalla. Professor Bhalla and I go back a long time during our Hyderabad days, where I was a fellow and he was a young Turk, fellow panelists and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to express my gratitude to Sahitya. Am I audible? My gratitude to Sahitya Academy for having me here. This is an honor to be a part of such a huge gathering, getting to know friends. See, I begin with a disclaimer, call it a confession or a disclaimer. I'm not a translator in the sense in which Professor Bhalla or Sukrita or the others are. I'm an accidental translator. You know, I don't allude to any title of any book, but I'm an accidental translator. Over the last 20 years or more, I have gone into Odisha studies, Odia culture, cultural history. So perforce, I've been engaged in translating huge passages of discursive material, prose and poetry, from fiction and short stories, as and when I needed them, if they did not already exist. So that is why I say I'm an accidental translator. It's not that I have not translated. I have not translated whole books, except for one book of nonsense and several pieces of nonsense. And I have talked about elsewhere the difficulties of translating nonsense. But I thought this gathering is far too serious for any discussion of nonsense, because some people mistake nonsense to be bad writing. Any bad writing is nonsense. So that is not my specialization. It's like Abol Tabol and Alice in Wonderland and so on and so forth. Talking about challenges in translation, as Professor Bhalla said, and I want to add to it, you know, this goes back, translation goes back a long time, centuries ago. The whole world began with translation, is what he said. I would further say that translations always existed. I mean, challenges always existed along with any attempt to translate. No one was free from you know, these challenges. I'll give the example of the Odia poet Sarala Das. There are various reasons, various kinds of challenge. The challenges are not the same. They could be over the choice of the text that is being translated. It could be about you know, the historical circumstances that the translator is confronted by, and so on. So Sarala Das faced a kind of challenge. You know, that was the beginning of the early centuries of the vernacular millennium, when numerous Indian languages began translating from Sanskrit texts, Mahabharata, Ramayana, and the Vedas, and Bhagavata, and so on and so forth. Sarala Das was one of the first, and in fact, Sarala Das laid the foundation of what we call Odia literature in the 15th century. He says that, when we talk about challenges, we are not talking about infelicitous translations as we often do. The problem that I faced whenever I went to any translation, pre-existing translation, there were times when I found them unacceptable because of misinterpretation of the text, because translation also involves interpretation. Sometimes they are grossly misinterpreted and distorted. So that is where I chose to translate them on my own, even when there is a translation existing before mine. Sarala Das translated Mahabharata, but also Bilanka Ramayana. His translation of Ramayana is very different. Both Ramayana and Mahabharata very different from the original ones. And Chandi Purana. Now the problem that he faced, one or two, the challenges that he faced, he confessed. One is that he was Sudra. He called himself Sudra, and his name was Parida, Siddheswar Parida, which he changed to Sarala Das because he was a worshipper of the local deity Sarala. So first of all, he adopted a name. So that is how he avoided, the charges of, the Brahmins that, he should not have translated a Sanskrit text. It's a sacred text. देव भाषा में लिखा गया है. आप क्यों इसको आम आदमी के भाषा में लिख रहे हो? So in order to avoid those charges, he first of all changed his name. Then he also, in his invocation, he says the task, I'm translating, lines, prose translation of his invocation. The task is written forbiddingly with vignas. So challenge, we already see the challenge that Sarala Das is confronted by. He calls them vignas or challenges, pitfalls. Hence I plead with you, this is an invocation to Ganesha. Why? Ganesha is Vignesha. He is the destroyer of all vigna. To enable me to overcome the pitfalls. The subject and its ingredients are interesting, steeped as they are in Ranga and Rasa. Be satisfied, therefore, and permit me to tell the story of the Mahabharata. He keeps the 18 parvas, but not in the same sequence. Many of the parvas deal with subjects which are not there in Vyasa's Mahabharata. And he knew that he would again be charged with distortion. So what he did, he said, whatever Sarala, Ma Sarala has dictated to me is what I have written down. So it's not my fault. So the earliest Odia poet also talks about the challenges that he confronted, and every translator, what is solved, tries to overcome those challenges, as does Sarala Das. So this is an important aspect. So Sudra, that was one of the major challenges. However, one of the unstated, these problems he stated, and he tried to find ways to negotiate those issues. But there was one issue which he could not, he did not mention in the invocation or anywhere, that is how to make the Mahabharata, which is the story of people elsewhere, relevant to his own land, that is Odisha. So he took the Pandavas through Odisha. All the place names that you find in Sarala Mahabharata. Now there are numerous names all over Odisha from Mahabharata, characters in the Mahabharata. And Agni. And then he relates it to the birth of Jagannath and the Puri temple. So an ordinary Odia reading his Mahabharata will see the happenings in his own land. So otherwise, he would be totally alienated from the story. So this is what Sarala Das did. Before I continue, I would like to reiterate what has already been said at 2 or 3 other sessions, which is that just like our literary heritage, the heritage of translated literature occurs in 3 phases. One phase I have just mentioned, this has happened elsewhere in India, the Bhakti, up to the Bhakti tradition, when all these texts were translated into Indian languages. Then comes the time when the Mughals arrive, and then there is another kind of translation from Sanskrit texts to Perso-Arabic translations. This is something that happens, and I'm not going into the problems that they must have been confronted by, which is a particular kind of belief system being transported to a language which is based, or rather which is rooted in another kind of belief system. So the kind of problems that they encounter, whether it is Darusiko or the others, can only be imagined. I'm skipping that for want of time, and I'm coming to the third era. Of course, none of these eras are closing down at a particular point. They are spread out, they overlap, and they are a continuum. So this endotropic translations and the exotropic translations that follow, the Rika in cycles. The third stage is the colonial era, when the Devbhasha is replaced by the Bhasha of the masters, English. So again, like Sanskrit was translated into Indian languages, numerous European and English texts are translated into Indian languages. So initially, they are the missionaries who translated the Bible and other scriptures, and they are very funny. The Odia that they used was so funny. Fakir Mohan describes in his autobiography when there was a missionary, Reverend Miller. He didn't know much Odia, but he wanted to translate the Bible and some parts of the Bible into Odia. So he didn't understand the syntax of Odia, he just knew the Odia words. By then Amos Sutton also had, got some Odia dictionaries made from English to Odia and Odia to Odia as well. So he used those words to translate. And then he asked Fakir Mohan Senapati to edit it. Fakir Mohan Senapati saw that it was horrendous, the translation was horrendous, so he corrected it. But Miller was not satisfied. He did not like any of the natives, non-Christian natives. So he asked somebody else to look at Fakir Mohan's editing. And this person was equally ignorant. He saw an expression, Ishwaranka Astitva is what he had translated, the existence of the Lord. So Astitva, this person mistook it to have something to do with Asti, that is bones. He said, how can you talk about the skeleton of God? So this is something that Fakir Mohan describes. And notorious, the kind of Odia, many Odia historians have given credit to the missionaries for having shaped modern Odia prose. But this is the kind of prose they were writing. Even in conversation, there was a joke, there are many jokes which they called rahasya. One Englishman asked somebody, wanted to have a female donkey. He did not know what a female, or rather Jenny is called in Odia. So he says, he tells somebody, look, I want a donkey, gadha. मुझे एक गधा चाहिए. मेरे जैसे नहीं. मेम साहब जैसे. मेरे जैसे नहीं, मेम साहब जैसे. मतलब फीमेल गधा. So So, and Fakir Mon narrates all these in his autobiographies. So this is very interesting. Then of course Fakir Mon translated the Ramayana and Mahabharata. He talks about why he translated the Ramayana. His wife was very unwell. She was in her deathbed. And just as Jagannath Das translated Bhagavata in the 16th century, for the same reason that he wanted his wife to be able to read the Bhagavata in Odia, because he didn't understand Sanskrit. So Fakir Mon also translated into simple, there are already pre-existing translations of the Mahabharata and Ramayana, but they were not in the kind of language that his wife would understand. So he translated many, and very simple Odia. So there are all these new kinds of translations happening, and of course there is the story that was mentioned, I think, yesterday or the day before, of how textbooks were produced. They were not there for school, the school textbooks which are produced in Odia. Otherwise, all the textbooks were Bengali, and Odias wanted these textbooks to be, the media of instruction to be in Odia. So they produced on a war footing, literally on a war footing, lot of Odia texts, and they were all translations either from Bangla or from English. Now when he translated, Fakir Mon himself translated from Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar's Jivan Charit, the challenge that he had to face was the similarity of the language. The script is different, but the language and the idiom are very similar. And he was immediately accused of Banglafying Odia. And this was a tool which the proponents of the Bengali medium used against the Odias. But of course it didn't work. Then Fakir Mon tried very hard to write in a kind of Odia that would be different from Bangla. Of course, the language register that he uses is polyglot. Marathi, what they call Bihari, Hindi, and Bangla, Odia, and sometimes even English words. And his word play is, one cannot stop once one starts talking about Fakir Mohan. He would play with words like municipality. He didn't like the idea of municipality because they charged money for using a toilet. So he said, why, we have open fields, why should you ask us to pay? So municipality, he coined a different word. He said, Manasa Phalati. There is fruit of the mind, Manasa Phalati, municipality. So like this. Then, भाटी मतलब जहाँ शराब बेचते हैं ना, भाटी कहते हैं. तो बाहर एक आ गया, तो बोला बाहर है बाहर भाटी, बाहर का भाटी, जो बाहर जाके आप पी सकते हो बाहर. So he always played with language. But this kind of endothermic translations continued. There were no translations except for Nagendrawala's translation of Radhanath, because she loved Radhanath, into Bangla, one or two, very rare. The first major translation comes when Harindranath Chattopadhyay translate first major Odia modern poet, Sachi Rautrai, into Bangla. But these were few and far between. Real translation, exothermic translation, started from the 1950s onwards, from Odia into English and English into Odia. So one of the translations was that of The Wasteland. It's very interesting. The Wasteland was translated by Gyanendra Verma. He was a very well-known poet, famous poet. He translated them very well. Like our Vishnu Khare, it was a faithful translation, but there were these problems which he could not solve. And he fell into a trap. For example, that Shakespearean rag. He didn't know about the American rag culture. So rag he translated into a torn cloth. Like rags to riches, torn cloth. So this was one. Similarly, the other passage, a clatter and a chatter from within where fishmen lounge at noon. This is another line from the wasteland, which he translated to Dvipahara bele macho hate suni achi kina bika chitkara rolo. You know the subtlety he just couldn't get. He turns it into a fish market. Fishmen talking to each other becomes this. So these are the problems that we encounter when Odias translate from English into Odia. And Bar he translated, yes, just I'm completing, just 2 minutes more. Bar is Bhojyalaya, that is eating place, Bar. My last example is from Fakir Mohan's Chaumanatugund. It's a very complex novel, as everyone knows. It has been translated at least 5 or 6 times. Every new translation is greeted by, देखो इसको क्या कर दिया, इसको ये लिख दिया, ये बिल्कुल पकड़ नहीं पाया फकीर मोहन का जो पन है, ये पकड़ नहीं पाया. So then I start translating it. After it is published, so there are 6 or 7 translations of Chaumanatugund. The last one and the most well-known is an act of translation by 4 or 5 different translators. Now, they are coming from their vantage points, you know, a native English speaker and somebody who is located in America and 2 insiders. But even then, enough research, they did a lot of research. It's an excellent translation, but I'll give you one example of what happens when Fakir Mohan describes Dildar Mian, one character, who is illiterate, but he has earned a lot of money. So Fakir Mohan says, look at this fellow, he uses the pen, I mean literally, ये उल्टी कलम से लिख के इतना पैसा कमाया है, हम लोग इतना पढ़े हैं, लिखे हैं, सीधी कलम चला रहे हैं, फिर भी हम लोग गरीब हैं. So this they have translated it as, इनको they say they can Dildar Mian cannot hold his pen straight. We hold the pen straight properly, and we are so poor, he is so rich. What Fakir Mohan meant was Persian script, you know, when you write from right to left, unlike us who write from left to right. So look at this, you know, 4 translators face this challenge and they are unable to meet it. So what do I do? How can I quote from, and this is published by California University Press, okay? Yeah, so this is prescribed in Delhi University, but you cannot go around telling people, look, this is not what it is. So right now 2 more translations are in progress. One of them is a contributor to this translation, and he is now collaborating with somebody else. Okay, so the reason why this, but I'm not saying that all Odia texts are difficult. I mean, I'm not talking about the Odia language, no narcissism there. I'm just talking about Fakir Mohan's Chaumanatugund, which has a complex register. In 1928, when the book, an edition of the book was published, his son edited it, and there are more than 300 annotations. So many of the words had gone out of use by 1928, that is 26 years after it was first published. And by now, very few Odias can understand what is there. So now, I just wanted to make another proposition, which is that time has come for us to do interlinguistic translation, interlingual translation. Let us translate like Chaucer was verso and recto. So let us do that. Not only Fakir Mohan, we go back to even Sarala Das and others. These are texts which, Upendra Bhanja, which many of us don't understand, many of our younger people. So this is, thank you very much.
No time for questions? I'm being told almost no time for questions, right? We could take 5 minutes, maybe 2 questions. Yeah. Yeah, first. Yeah, please, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a remark on what the problem posed by Chandana, which is that we look more kindly upon Indian English fiction and not so much on translations into English. I think the crucial reason for this is that people translate into their mother tongues. all over the world. Yeah, that is the norm. Except that English translators in India, like you and me, we translate out of our mother tongue into something, into a language that we have learned probably imperfectly. This is one part. The second part is that the Indian English fiction milieu, they would like to give themselves a centrality. It means that they write better English than us. So, I mean, this is how I see it.
Yeah, that's not a question, just a comment.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a comment.
Sukrita. Question and short one, please.
No, it's not a question again, just a remark. I just want to say that, our obsession with the notion of the original, I think that's where the crucial point is, that we want to reach the original. And I think any translation that is a good translation reads original. I won't say like an original, becomes an original. So I think we need to basically debate on that entire notion of the original. And I would relate that to what you said earlier. If we are talking about translation, and everything is translation,
Yeah,
or we say everything is original. That is
thank you.
what-
So,
like to just extend it to this, that no original leads us to original.
that's right. Any other questions, if there's any? Well, thank you. I think we'll have to stop because the Academy has other things in front of us. So thank you very much to all the speakers and to a very fine audience. Yeah, thank you very much.
सभी का धन्यवाद। एक सूचना है कि जो शाम को 6 बजे बाद समापन समारोह होना है वो गौरांजनी सभागृह में होगा। पहले अंजनी बताया गया था, लेकिन अब वो स्थान बदल दिया गया है। गौरांजनी सभागृह में अंतिम सत्र के लिए हम सभी मिलेंगे। धन्यवाद।